You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 18th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio.
President Trump has a phone call with Vladimir Putin. Can he negotiate peace? What's France gained from the world's current uncertainty? And are the days of free checked-in luggage checking out? I'm Emma Nelson, and the Monocle Daily from Paris starts now. Hello and a very warm welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our brand new studios here on 16 Rue Bachaumont in Paris. I'm Emma Nelson and I'll be joined round the table by my guests Simon Bouvier and Colette Davidson. We'll talk about the day's big stories and we'll celebrate the French capital with a look at how, with the Pompidou Centre closing for 5 years, there's still no shortage of things to do. So stay tuned, all that and more coming right up here on the Monocle Daily. So, a very warm welcome to you. If you are a Monocle Daily listener and you've noticed a slight change in acoustic, we have a change of location as well. We're at 16 Rue Bachaumont, the new nest, the new headquarters that Monocle has set up with cafe and bureau and wonderful things. And also you'll notice a change in acoustics because we're wearing slightly marvellous headphones. And Simon Bouvier, the Paris bureau chief, you can tell us why. Are we allowed to say why?
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir. Hello. Why we have these wonderful headphones? We're in the middle of Paris, which means that we're quite near a metro line.
We are indeed. And we hope that even the keenest listeners will not notice when nearby metro rumbles by. But you can definitely tell in the studio that there are subways passing to and fro while we're on air. And as long as you can't tell, we're all good.
Well, there's a definite sense that we're in the middle of Paris, which is absolutely thrilling. Colette Davidson, you're a journalist based here in Paris. Thank you so much for coming back. The last time we saw you, we were doing Monocle in Paris, in the middle of a boiling hot Olympic game world. And I just said to you, what's changed? And you went, everyone got grumpy again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was to be expected. It is Paris. As I said to you earlier, we're seeing everybody, back in their black clothes. Now it's seemingly winter again in March, and the grumpiness is continuing on. But we hope a little bit of sun this week will change things.
I caused a major stir by not wearing a black coat when I got off Eurostar. Red. People looked at me like I'd done very bad things.
That's a faux pas. I don't know for spring yet, if you're able to do that quite yet.
Are we there yet, Simon?
Technically, it's on the 21st.
Okay.
So turtlenecks until then.
Okay, fine.
Preferably dark.
I failed. Right, let's have a look at what's happening in the world. The US and Russian presidents have held a phone call this afternoon. The conversation finished a little while ago. It was 90 minutes long. We're getting a few details about what they were talking about. But this discussion was part of a new drive from the White House to engage with Moscow. This change in direction has had two effects. It's broken away from Western efforts to isolate Vladimir Putin as his troops continue their invasion of Ukraine. Secondly, it's placed Donald Trump in the driving seat when it comes to trying to solve the world's woes. Simo, I remember a couple of weeks ago when President Trump, practically had his foot on Volodymyr Zelensky's windpipe and says, "You don't hold any cards." One wonders, does Trump hold any cards himself when it comes to all this?
I think so. I think the question is, does he have any desire to play them in favor of a country that he does not seem to see much advantage in defending? And I think that's a pattern that you see with him, which is what is America's narrow self-interest, in my view, and not in anybody else's. And if I can't get to that, then I'm not going to mobilize any of America's considerable resources to give you a hand. So there are a lot of things that he could do and that he has kind of threatened to do to Russia. He could, redouble American military assistance to Ukraine. He could implement more sanctions. He could make life for Vladimir Putin more difficult. But the question is he really willing to do that? I think you see a pattern of not really. You don't start a negotiation by conceding on every single point, almost bullet by bullet, if you were going through a document that the Russians have wanted all along. And now on the ground, as Putin stalls, the situation is changing, and all of the leverage that Ukraine used to have is fading away. So there really isn't there's no turning back, and I'm pessimistic that America will use its leverage in favor of Ukraine and kind of do a U-turn on this.
There's an incredibly good article in this week's L'Express by a journalist called Axel Gilden, and he talks about the idea, Colette, that if you want to understand Donald Trump, you have to understand wrestling, insofar as this is drama. There is a good guy and a bad guy. And also, it's all very, very fake and very, very staged. But no one ever dare say that.
Well, I mean, you're exactly right. There is an element of drama in everything that Trump does. I mean, he had his reality television show. He loves to make a spectacle. And it's hard to know sometimes what is true and what is not with him. He lives on, this disruption, chaos, unpredictability. We see some of that in wrestling. And Richard Nixon, he had this madman theory to get the U.S. to win during Vietnam War, to create a sense of mental instability. He thought that was the key to winning. And we kind of see Trump doing the same thing, creating unpredictability, bluffing, pushing the needle as far as it can go, and then pulling it back. We saw these with some of his threats on tariffs, other threats he's made, and then pulling them back a few days later. And I think I do think that it is part of his strategy, and we don't know everything yet because it's still early days in his presidency. But I'd like to think that this sort of these bullying tactics, they have some reasoning behind them other than just disrupting and degrading relationships with his allies, especially, which I think is the most shocking for people.
I wonder whether you were sort of overthinking Trump, though, in certain ways by saying, is there a long-term strategy with this? I mean, either of you answer me this, there is that idea that Donald Trump just likes to win, even if it's at the expense of everybody else. And this winning / chaos approach could be quite successful.
And to your point, both of your points really, he enjoys drama. There was an article in the New York Times a few days ago about not an Oval Office, but a cabinet meeting confrontation between a full cabinet meeting with Donald Trump and all of his cabinet and Elon Musk. And there was this shouting match essentially between the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Elon Musk saying, you can't just run amok in the government and start firing people left, right, and center and telling us how to run our respective portefeuille. And Donald Trump, by the account of the journalist who wrote the article about this, was just sitting there, and it looked like he was watching a tennis match. To this kind of taste for drama. You mentioned the Oval Office showdown with Zelensky earlier. It concluded with Trump saying, this was great television. Sometimes you're right. Maybe we think that it's a scheme and that he's trying to achieve something specific with it. But maybe the drama is the point sometimes with him.
And one wonders, listening or dealing with President Trump at the end of the phone for an hour and a half of what can only be described quite interesting minutes, would be Vladimir Putin. And this is a man who has been in charge of a regime for a very, very long time. He may not have seen the likes of Donald Trump before. Well, he saw him in his first iteration. But there is absolutely no doubt that Putin will be ready for this, won't he?
I mean, it's really interesting to watch that relationship play out because we don't really know what Putin thinks of Donald Trump. I mean, I think Trump feels that he is respected by Vladimir Putin, but he may not be. Putin may very well be playing Trump had his own game, let's say. So I think we're just going to have to wait to see what really comes out of that. I think what is most striking from the conversation today is what people have been saying for several days now, is that Ukraine was not present for this call. These two men were speaking about a country that was not represented in that call. And I think that is the real scandal, in my opinion.
And it's interesting. We've just had the readout come through from Caroline Levitt, the readout from the White House press secretary, saying today President Trump and President Putin spoke. That's so strange, about the need for peace and a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Both leaders agreeing this conflict needs to end with lasting peace, stressing the need for improved bilateral relations between the US and Russia. The blood and treasures that both Ukraine and Russia have been spending would be better spent on the needs of their people. Fine. This conflict should never have started and should have been ended long ago with sincere and good faith peace efforts. There is absolutely no reference to there, Simon, is the fact that as far as, the last time I checked history, it was Russia who mounted a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 now.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we were talking about this earlier, one of these kind of concessions that they're making, which is to say we are not taking the position that you are in the wrong here. All we're interested in is coming to some resolution to this conflict that hopefully will lead to the United States drawing economic advantage from it. And that's about it. I think their actions kind of show that this is the kind of full extent of the thinking, but the speed ending the war so that the White House can say, look at us, we came in and we ended it quickly as we said we would, is more important than how it is ended.
And it is that issue, isn't it, that the conflict resolution in Trump's eyes needs to be done quickly. But as we saw, I think the security advisor for the British government, Jonathan Powell, was in Washington last week, and the one thing he said was, this takes time. You cannot resolve a long-running war with decades of difficult, sensitive stories and experiences just with Donald Trump coming in and striking a deal.
It's true. And I mean, we've heard in the last couple of days, this is not just about territory that is under concern in this current conflict. We're also talking about Crimea, which happened several years ago. So this is, as you mentioned, a long-running situation and not one that is going to resolve from a one-hour conversation. And I think, Simon, you're exactly right that Trump appears to just want to kind of win, to be the hero and say that he played the main hand in ending this war. But we can't forget that there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation coming out of his administration when it comes to who started the war. The language that he uses does not mention the fact that, as you said, Emma, that it was indeed Russia who launched the invasion, and we can't forget that.
Let's look a little bit closer to home here in Europe, because as we have Donald Trump turning America's back to the West in the eyes of many, well, the search seems to be on for a new leader for the West, and there has been no shortage of suggestions that maybe the moment has come for the man who's about he normally lives about half an hour walk from here in the Elysee Palace. As more and more parts of the world are destabilised, is France having its moment in terms of leadership and the one to go to for resources? Simon, starting with you and just watching the way that France has stepped up recently. Are we talking about France or are we talking about Emmanuel Macron?
I think we're talking about France, but I think it's a question of how much the country and all of its political class is now behind the idea of strategic autonomy for Europe, not relying on the United States as much as Europe has been doing for past decades, et cetera, et cetera. I think there was no consensus before the second Trump administration that it was necessary for Europe to take a hard look at its defense spending, at its general defense preparedness, really, and be more independent from, in the incoming German chancellor's words, from the United States when it comes to all of this. I think for decades, a lot of countries, including France, were a bit complacent and more than willing to say okay when the United States said, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it, it's in our interest to do so. You can spend your money on schools and on the motorways. We'll take care of the nuclear umbrella. I think since de Gaulle, France has always been a bit of a kind of black sheep in the European consensus of, yes, let's just let America handle everything. They've always insisted that as the continent's only nuclear armed state, now the European Union's only nuclear armed state since Britain is no longer in the EU. They have a particular role to play in this regard. But the difference is now everybody agrees, and including Germany. You know, the power couple of Europe is France and Germany, and they historically have been at odds on this. We've talked about this on Monocle Radio many times. But now there seems to be alignment across Europe, and including not just the EU, including the UK, that there needs to be a real kind of waking up on these defense
I think
problems.
we have Merz and Macron having, not necessarily just having dinner tonight, but they're certainly working together. They're having a meeting in Berlin. It's just turning to the
and
more...
his mammoth spending plan was just, the Merz's was just approved in the parliament.
The budget's gone up. Emmanuel Macron arrives on your doorstep saying, let's talk. And it sort of echoes a bit something that Emmanuel Macron's been talking about for a very, very long time, as Simon just mentioned, that I think it was about 7 years ago, he delivered a speech at the Sorbonne, and he told his European neighbours basically that a sort of a communal sovereignty needed to be built, or that, you know, that we could no longer rely on America. And suddenly when you talk about communal sovereignty, everybody starts to sort of break out in a funny rash. But there is this idea that Europe needed to step up as a sort of a unified body if they couldn't rely on America. But he was talking about this 7 years ago, but the investment in French armaments in the military hasn't been matched by those words. And one wonders how much France has actually changed and readied itself for what Macron is now repeating.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because, I mean, I don't agree personally with how Trump has gone about things. But one sort of good thing that has come out of this is that Europe has really woken up and gotten its act together. I mean, if we look at the war in Ukraine, since that has begun, you know, leaders across Western Europe have been saying, you know, the fight for Ukraine is a fight for all of Europe. The fight for democracy is a fight for all of our democracy. But we haven't really seen the money behind that rhetoric. And so I think now there is a sense that, okay, Ukraine is Europe's responsibility to a certain degree. And as you said, Simon, we can't rely on the U.S.'s aid anymore. We have to look inwards. And so I think in that way, it has been good. And as you mentioned, Emma, Macron has been saying this, that we needed a stronger Europe since 2017. He's, you know, called for a common budget, a common finance minister, and everyone thought he was completely nuts. And now here we are. I mean, he hasn't actually said, I told you so, but I'm sure he's thinking it. So, yeah, he's always fought for Europe. And so now I think he's getting a little bit more respect for that. And we are seeing that in the polls, that French people, they're becoming more interested and more invested in international affairs. And while spending power is still their number one concern, what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in Ukraine is also, rising in the polls as a concern. And so in that way, Macron is also getting, more respect.
We have seen a bounce, haven't we, in the polls? I think they've gone up to 31% approval rating, which is up 7 points, which in the grander scheme of things is enormous. But actually for Emmanuel Macron, who was really struggling domestically, and one wonders when you are, when you're talking to businesses or to each other or in daily situations, is there more of a sense that France is aware of the outside world? Because France is very good at looking inward because it has everything it needs on its doorstep. But to suddenly think that actually it needs to have a much higher awareness of what's happening in the outside world. Are you noticing this, Simon?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that in the EU, there is true, for all of its flaws and all of the difficulties in creating political integration, the economic integration of the EU has created very real ties and connections between the citizens of all of the different countries of the European Union. And so I don't think it's as abstract for as many people as we think that Ukraine is on the European continent. And next is Poland, other states or countries that are in the EU and that are more familiar to French people. I think citizens understand the stakes here a lot more than, if you're in the United States, as Zelensky told Trump and Vice President Vance, you have an ocean between you and us. I think it's way more abstract for them. For us, through Erasmus, students' exchanges, through all of the kind of cultural back and forth that there's been on the continent, I think people, now that they understand that the threat is real, I think they're way more behind this. And the action, the rhetoric on spending more on defense, etc., has been matched by action to some degree in France. The defense budget has increased significantly. There are plans now to increase it even further. But yeah, I think between the fact that he's been singing from this song sheet for a very long time and the fact that there has been a true effort to prepare the French military, now France is in a position of leadership when it comes to these defense questions in Europe.
You're listening to the Monocle Daily, coming live from Paris with Colette Davidson and Simon Bouvier. Emma Nelson here behind the microphone. And let's celebrate a bit of Paris now. Or rather, let's temporarily wave goodbye to a very, very big part of Paris's cultural life. The Centre Pompidou has closed for the time being. It shut its doors for a refurbishment last week. It will be gone for 5 years. And the question is being asked, what will all these culture-ravenous Parisians do? Colette, I love the Centre Pompidou, and I tell you why. It's the only place where you always find something that someone likes. Given the fact that you can take grandma there, she'll like the whatever's in the art gallery. You can take a 10-year-old there, and they'll like the escalators. And so, are we now losing that one place that everyone had something to talk about, at least? Because I do know, Fred, I think Gillian DeBias of Monocle absolutely despises it. She says it's like having excess wires in your house. But there is something that someone always, it got everybody going, didn't it?
It's true. I mean, it's very distinctive. I remember learning about the Pompidou in my French class in junior high. So it definitely has something very, very significant about it. And it's just on a personal note, it's my daughter's favorite museum. So I know she's sad. She's only 6, but when she finds out, I'm sure she'll be very
Paris
sad.
Thing to say. That's the most Paris thing I think you've said.
but we can't forget that there are many other places to go in Paris. And not only that, the exhibitions, many of the exhibitions will be temporarily held in other sites. There's the Gaîté Lyrique. There are a few other museums. The Louvre is going to host a few, Quai Branly, a few other museums that are going to host the exhibitions that would have normally been at the Pompidou. So we haven't lost all of those exhibitions if you're a fan of modern art. Otherwise, of course, there are many other options.
There are. But is there anything just quite like the Pompidou Centre? I mean, because who have you been dragged to the Pompidou Centre by, or who have you dragged?
Well, I don't know if I was dragged there. I think
I'm trying not to translate that directly into French argot at that point.
We had a Monocle group outing, actually, at the Centre Pompidou recently to see their exhibit dedicated to bande dessinée, the French comic books. And I had mixed feelings about the exhibition itself, but the outing was a success. And it's, as you were saying, Colette, the space is so unique, and you just, it's probably one of the easiest places to enjoy some culture in the city, but by no means the only one. I mean, we're really, really lucky to have many, many, many cultural institutions here that have lots of cool exhibits. I recently went to the Picasso Museum, which is in a beautiful, beautiful building, 17th century building. that was built as a kind of competitor to the Vaux-le-Vicomte castle. And inside, you find a lot of beautiful modern art exhibits. The one that's in there right now is a fascinating exhibit about art that the Nazis considered degenerate. They actually showed it to the public to say, here are all of the examples of art that we consider deviant. And you find all of the masters in there, including Picasso. So it's a fascinating exhibit about kind of how the othering of forms of expressions that did not conform with their vision of the world happened.
It reminds me of the line in Alexei Navalny's autobiography that said, growing up in the Soviet Union, in the Ukrainian part of the Soviet Union, he had to watch lots of documentaries about how terrible rock music was, and it gave him a lifelong love of the medium and made him adore rock music for absolutely every single
how it works,
for the rest of his life. Yes, show us some good art, ladies and gentlemen. We might quite like it. Colette, I have to ask this very honest question. From the outside, it looks like Parisians are going to art galleries all the time. How true is that?
Well, I don't want to burst any bubbles here, but I think the reality is that if that's your thing, then you're obviously going to take advantage. But it's like anything. You know, I live in Paris, but I don't go to the Eiffel Tower every weekend. Just like I don't go to museums every weekend or, pièces de théâtre. I don't go to the theater. I don't go to the cinema. But I do have some favorites. There's one museum called the Atelier des Lumières, where it's a little bit controversial because it projects the art onto the walls. So you have a 3D, sort of not 3D, but an immersive, a 360 immersive experience. I really like that one. And when I can, I go to another cultural center called the 104, which is in my neighborhood in the 19th, and you can watch people dancing. You can go to an art gallery, or you can even go to a thrift store.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Let's move on finally for the discussion for today about travelling by plane. And actually the process of booking a flight is, I don't know if you found it, it's become increasingly involved as you sort of click from step to step and the costs layer up like a very irritating millefeuille or a vanilla slice. Because I think we can safely say that gone are the days of transparent pricing for many airlines. The US leads the way with this, and American Airlines, Delta, United already charging for checked luggage, particularly on domestic and economy fares. And the US carrier Southwest has now just, which has a known bags fly free policy, has just decided it's gone all away. I wonder whether knowing the final cost of a flight is pretty much anyone's guess now. When was the last time you tried to book a flight and then realised that what you started off with a number was effectively a rather magnificent work of fiction?
Yeah, I travel often actually because I'm in a family. My partner is Spanish, so we often, go to Spain, and then I'm from the US, so I travel to the US. So I have a lot of experience with this bag situation. And when we go to Spain, we often have to pay for a suitcase, so we'll just travel with a backpack. Now, if you have our situation where you can stay with your in-laws, that's fine. You can just put a few things in a backpack. But for most people, that's really not an option. I feel like a few years ago, it was maybe kids fly free or dogs fly free, but now the bags can't even fly free. I mean, that's pretty sad.
Your thoughts, Simon?
Well, I remember a couple of years ago having my kind of bubble of the freedom that European air travel offers burst by arriving at the check-in counter for an airline that will remain unnamed and realizing that carry-on was not a carry-on to them. There, you had to put it in these bins that you have at the airport, and their bin was smaller than the standard bin. And if you had a standard carry-on, then you had to pay extra because that one was bigger. And I think that's emblematic of where we are now because of how competitive, I suppose, the industry has become. That any kilo that they can compensate for, they're going to take the opportunity to do so, because otherwise they might lose out.
There are those. I think there's a commentator who is from the United States who's when talking about this Southwest Airlines thing, getting rid of bags fly free. Basically said this is how you destroy a brand. You destroy customer preferences. You destroy loyalty. The whole thing just goes in an instant, and then. What happened to those wonderful days of knowing, when you knew which airline you were going to fly, you kind of expected, you knew what you were going to get, basically.
I mean, maybe the good thing in all of this is that it's going to push people to take more trains. I don't know. Obviously, there are certain trips that you can't take by train, but it's true that it's really too bad, because travel is supposed to be an enjoyable experience, and it does seem like, at least when it comes to airline travel, whether it's, the security checks becoming more cumbersome, or, the cost of booking a flight or checking your bag, it just creates kind of a disagreeable experience.
There is a role, however, that airlines can play, Simon, which is to ensure that you retain customer loyalty. I mean, if you look at the likes of the UAE carriers, the Etihads of this world and the Emirates, they do the checked-in bags comes as standard, and you just have that little spring in your step when you know that you're not going to have to click through to your ultimate guest price. And I remember when flying from City Airport in London with British Airways suddenly became an absolutely glorious experience, because they recognised that the departures area at City wasn't very big. And so they brought back the trolley. And everybody got a free gin and tonic when they got on the plane. Has that affected my choice of airlines and destination and departure airport? Possibly. And there's that idea of how can you actually make people fall in love with your travel without making it feel as if you're having to pay for a perk, that it's actually part of the fun.
Absolutely. I think in a lot of other customer-facing industries, including retail, this kind of idea of customer experience is growing in importance in every strategist's mind. But it seems like when it comes to airlines, that's not really the case for most of us. Then obviously you have exceptions to the rule. But I think that putting the experience, no matter what whether you're flying economy or you're flying first class, putting the experience of the customers first is probably something that they need to keep in mind.
Simone, I want you to talk to us about what we're going to hear about now, that we're talking about Air France.
Not so accidental segue.
Not so accidental segue, but elegant, I would hope, ish. So it now has this amazing first class suite La Première. It has everything on offer that you could possibly dream of in the sky. So your food is brought to you by Alain Ducasse and other Michelin star chefs. You have custom Jacquemus pajamas, yes, and Sisley beauty products. I mean, we were discussing whether they should all be interchangeable, but that might create chaos. But this glorious thing about La Première is going to be connecting Paris to the world in a very beautiful and elegant example of French soft power, which it does pretty well anyway. Now, you've been talking to the CEO, Ben Smith, haven't you, about it?
Yes, our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, and myself were at the launch of the new La Première cabin. They revealed it at an event here in Paris earlier today. And we caught up with him afterwards to ask him what the thinking was behind the launch of this new cabin. And not only the cabin, but the entire experience that surrounds the customers for the service.
It's interesting. You've come up with something which is very evolutionary. And I always think sort of in France, luxury is about codes. You sort of stick to the codes, and you've done that here. Was that a big discussion, or were there a lot of people saying, we need walls, we need doors, we need to get rid of curtains?
Well, it started out, we don't need first class or La Première. So this is where we were 5 years ago. Business class had gotten so good. We had a major, when I arrived, nobody wanted to invest in first class. It was actually, the plan was to, slowly retire it like some of our other competitors. With our brand, with our history, we can legitimately introduce something that's in this space, and we can be profitable. So this was the toughest. How do we position this product in a way that it can be profitable, and not just say, okay, we're going to spend this much money for a halo benefit for the brand? So that's where we started. Can we come up with a business case where this thing can be profitable? So not the easiest. So, I don't know if you know, in 2018, we're flying this thing all over the place, twice a week into some destinations in Africa, seasonal, like Miami was only half the year. New York, the product we had on the 380 was not the same as what we had on the 777. So we said, okay, we're going to clean all this up. Every route has to be at least one daily flight, at least year-round, and we want the same product. And we want the experience on the ground outside of Paris to be better than what we had in 2018. And that's where it started from. And so what's this all going to cost? But to answer your question, the base where we started from is amazing. When I arrived in 2018, I was like, why would you touch this? The colors are so subtle. The curtains, it's so light. You don't have this cubicle type feel. The food is amazing. 4 seats, you feel like a private jet. We had a lot of push saying, we're going to do this, make it worthwhile, and do 8 seats or do 12 seats. Like, no, we're doing 4. And this way you've got the 2 in the middle for a couple. Somebody can sit on the side. And what we've been seeing, I think I mentioned this to you before, which is new, is we have people buying the whole cabin. And these are mostly people, like business people, who are flying private jets and saying, this is much cheaper, I want to be discreet, I don't want to talk to my colleagues, I want the entire plane. And I'm like, nothing but early, so they have the whole plane to themselves. Now, this does not happen every day, but we do see it more and more.
I wanted to discuss the U.S. market because when we just looked at your wonderful results recently as well, North America is storming ahead. Maybe I should just say maybe the U.S. is storming ahead. Canada's maybe a question mark. But it's remarkable to look at the uptake. And I'm wondering, when you think of even a wealthy American, if they're not flying private, they're so embedded with their brand. Is it a big jump to get Americans to fly first, or they're right there with you all of a sudden?
It takes an effort. I think the brand is well known in New York, so it's word of mouth how we get our new customers. Our load factors out of New York are the highest ever, so we're increasing. We're adding frequencies. We don't have enough airplanes for New York. We don't have enough seats. Some days, we get a lot of complaints. I can't get a seat. People change at the last minute, as you know, especially people who buy first class. They can't get the flight that they want. But what we're seeing across the U.S. is increase in demand. How are we getting word out? How are we convincing people that are not, Flying Blue members, or are not, not loyal to SkyTeam, or they're not part of SkyTeam Airlines? What we're pleasantly surprised is that for a unique product like this, we're attracting Star Alliance loyal members, One World loyal members, because there's not one U.S. carrier that has first class. So if you want to fly in that company, you don't have, we're it. And I think our European competitors, they're not close. It's not. They don't have the experience from end to end. I don't think they have the French touch or the French feel. I don't think they can do it in a consistent way. So I think we're quite confident we can remain at the top of the European space with first class. And
you've even said global. Not just European, right? But and you have a very interesting, seemingly competitive product. So you've made a sort of a big statement. I'm wondering, how much does brand France, the luxury halo effect, also impact you as well when it comes to marketing and selling? How important is that?
Well, it's important, but it's amazing. For us, it's something that we've got, which no other country, none of our competitors have. It's not the same. I won't mention the countries. It's a lot easier to sell Paris than it is to sell. Some of the cities around us. Don't say so. But and the market's big. So that, I think, and we, Air France is intermingled with Made in France and French touch. And 92 years with France in your brand, we're legitimate. And La Première, we don't even say La Première or Classe La Première. We've taken out the class completely, and the brand can stand on its own. I like to always make sure it's linked to Air France, but you can see we don't even put the name of the airline. The brand itself stands out as a product.
And you said that it took 3 years of work to get to this place. From a kind of technical standpoint, what was the thing that was the biggest nightmare and that you're the proudest right now?
Well, I would say nightmare. I'd say the decision to actually do it was the right one, but it was difficult. To try to get all the teams on board, especially our accountants and our finance department, was the toughest. And then, of course, you have to decide which airplane, how many routes, what do you actually want to do on board, what do you want to do on the ground. But I think what I'm most happy about is that we were able to, I think in a very, very creative way, put in place 3 different zones. So eat, work, very comfortably and have a lot of place for your computer. Tyler knows this. You want to have a lot of counter space next to you. What we don't have today, which is here, is you can easily get in and out. You can easily eat with somebody, so that was really important. And then to lounge, if you're on a 14-hour flight, you may not want to sit, you may not want to sleep, you want to be like on a very comfortable sofa, and that's what the Méridien does, is you can put whatever position you want. You've got the TV on the other side, you've got some space on your counter here, and then we want to have a comfortable bed, and that of course is really important for at least some portion of the journey, and the bed's really comfortable, because today
I heard it's 2 meters long, which tall people like me appreciate, as well as the extra headroom. Was that a big challenge to remove the overhead bins and replace them?
Well, that's why having this space, because people want to be close to their bag, and I was very nervous with this. Would we be able to do something sturdy? I didn't want something malfunctioning or have to having tape all over it because we can't open or close it. But this thing, when it first came out, I kicked it so many times to make sure it was okay, because everyone does it, because the way customers treat things. I mean, it really got a beating to make sure that it passed our internal certification. But no, it's so to say what am I most proud about, that we've reached this point, and overall I think it's very, very elegant. This fits the brand, and I think it's difficult with a seat product to be able to say elegant. I don't think you can see another seat, be it first class or business class, that you could describe as legitimately elegant.
And that was the Air France KLM CEO Ben Smith talking to our editorial director Tyler Brûlé and Paris bureau chief Simon Bouvier a little bit earlier today about La Première. And that's all the time we have from this premiere edition of the Monocle Daily, live from Paris. A big thanks to my panellists, Simon Bouvier and Colette Davidson. Today's show was produced by Anita Riotta and researched by Francesca Gilks. Our sound engineer in London was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Emma Nelson here in Paris. Another special edition of the Monocle Daily from the French capital airs at the same time tomorrow. I hope you can join me for that. But for now, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.